Chair, I think the first thing that probably going to need to do is make sure I know how to work.
That would be good.
There we go. I got it working. Bylaws Committee was, I reported to you last year that we had a very busy year. We discussed many items, and we reformatted the bylaws, but we did not make any substantive changes to the bylaws last year. This year is going to be a little different story. We did work hard again, and our committee was very busy. We had conference calls at least once a quarter, and then we had a face-to-face meeting. You will see here the members of the Bylaws Committee: Jim Carroll, Jim C. Arcia, Rick David, Jim Gold, Leonard Sanchez, and our staff liaisons, Alfonso, John Johnson, and Noel Allen, of course, our legal counsel. We couldn't make it without Noel giving us guidance and direction. First thing I want to talk about is not changes to the bylaws, but enhancements that we made to the bylaws that did not result in substantive changes. We restructured parts of the bylaws. We moved 5 sections to where they belong. And you all were given the black line version of the bylaws earlier. They were distributed to you, to all the members. And you can see the sections that we did move to a more appropriate place. We worked diligently to collect all the nominating committee provisions into one section. We think we have that done now. And we deleted or combined duplicative provisions. In section 4.31, we begin to make some changes. And 4.3.1 is dealing with the chair. And we updated the reference to the latest edition of Robert's Rules of Order, and we also did that at 6.8. But the basic change that we made to the chair was we authorized the chair to appoint the vice chair or designate the vice chair as a member of any standing or non-standing committee, with the exception of the nominating committee and the ERB. And then in 4.32, we duplicated that same language with regard to the vice chair's duties, and it basically says that the vice chair may be appointed. So this was a change that resulted from actual practice. I mean, this was what was happening. It had never been formalized, and so we formalized it with this recommended change. Section 5.3, dealing with the regional meetings, there was a sentence in there that we dropped, and I will have to say we dropped that sentence because none of us could figure out what it meant or why it was there. So we dropped that sentence. Then we go to, and I didn't move my. Then we go to the committees, the Article 8, and we did some work here. At 8.1, we added the Executive Directors Committee as a standing committee, and I'll have some other comments about that as we go through Section 8 or Article 8. We added a provision for task forces. Heretofore, the bylaws were silent as to the appointment of task forces and study groups, and we're using task force and study group as synonymous, so we made a provision for task force. At 8.2, we added the secretary to the executive committee. The executive committee consists of the past chair, the vice chair, and the treasurer, and we really didn't understand why the secretary was excluded. And in addition to that, when you add the secretary, you have 5 members on the executive committee, which means that you've got a tie, you've got a provision to break a tie vote. We added the president, CEO, as an ex officio member of the executive committee. And our president, CEO, was invited and had been going to the executive committee meetings, and again, this was just to formalize his attendance. He is ex officio without vote. By the way, I didn't mention it, but the addition of the vice chair to the various committees back in section 4.3, the vice chair is also without vote. 8.6.2 was a confusing. It had to do with the ERB. It was a little confusing as to who appointed what and who appointed who. And so we tried to clarify that by saying that the NASBA chair appoints to the ERB, and all the references in that particular section, I hope, are now in clarified format and it's understandable to everyone. (8.7) Other committees. Again, we added references to task forces. We added the executive directors to the list of potential committee members. And we made it clear that the NASBA chair appoints task forces, but committee chairs can appoint current committee members to internal task forces. And that was just a clarification that was needed. Now, here is 8.8. When we were working with the bylaws, and as you all well know, there's a very important group called executive directors that are very important to the operation of NASBA. And when we got to working with the bylaws, we discovered that the only reference to executive director was an executive director could vote if their delegate was not, the board's delegate was not in attendance. So what we did is we formally recognized in section 8.8 the Executive Directors Committee and adding the ED chair as an ex officio member of BOD. And the Executive Directors Committee has a mission statement that was adopted in 1999, and that's in the bylaws. And this change is a change that we felt like that absolutely needed to be made. At section 9.7 has to do with indemnification, and you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets, and it doesn't take long to figure out who wrote those bullets. Our attorney wrote those. All I can tell you is that 9.7 aligns the NASBA bylaws with the Delaware law, since NASBA is a Delaware corporation, and that Delaware offers the largest body of relevant case law, time-tested and predictable. And those were the changes that we made. There are other potential changes that will be coming, that you potentially could see this coming year, items that we're currently looking at, but we're not recommending to you at this time. And one of them has to do with altering the terms of regional directors. Regional directors are one-year terms with a maximum of 3 years. Last year, we lost 5, or we had to replace 5 regional directors. This coming year, there's another possibility, if some of them do not get reappointed, that we may lose 5 more regional directors. And having a turnover of that nature is very difficult. This next item, when we wrote it, it was real clear. But after I came to this meeting, I discovered that it wasn't real clear because everybody kept asking me about it. And it has to do with the past chair from the nominating committee service. I understood it, but it's not worded real well. What you need to understand is that the bylaws state that the past chair is the incoming chair for the nominating committee. That is not going to change. What we've been asked to look at is that each region, or 8 regions, each region has a representative on the nominating committee. And we've been asked to look at whether it's appropriate for a past chair to be a regional representative on the nominating committee. We'll be looking at establishing a governance committee. We've been asked to look at clarifying that the audit committee has responsibility to approve audit reports for NASBA, CPT, and the NASBA 401k plan. As you can imagine, it becomes very difficult and almost unworkable when you're trying to finalize the audit report, and it's almost time for the annual meeting, and getting, right now the bylaws state that the board of directors is responsible for approving these audit reports, and we've just been asked to take a look at it. There'll be other items that we will also be looking at. There will continue to be, I'm sure, clarification and of certain areas that come to our attention, as well as recommendations from the member boards and the board of directors. And that is my report. And Mr. Chair, those are the highlights of the proposed amendments by the Bylaws Committee that we recommend. The entire bylaws, as rewritten, have been distributed in advance. And on behalf of the Bylaws Committee, I move the adoption of the bylaws as amended and rewritten.
Thank you, Jimmy. A motion from a committee chair does not require a second, but is there any further discussion, or are we ready to vote? Okay. A bylaws amendment, we'll take all of these all in one slate then, Jimmy. A bylaws amendment requires a 2/3 vote of the member boards present. Remember that each member board is represented by only one voting delegate. All voting delegates in favor of adopting the proposed amendments, please rise. If you'd stand up, please. Okay, all voting delegates opposed to adoption, all voting delegates in favor of adopting the proposed amendments, I guess I'll ask you to so indicate. Aye. Are there any opposed? Okay, thank you. You can sit down. Any abstentions? The motion passes. These bylaws shall become effective as of the first day following this business meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jimmy.